Derek Owens scored 187 points on Family Bond's Fast Money round, 13 points short of the $25,000 he needed to pay off the last of his daughter's medical guardianship legal fees. When Marcus Steele read the number out loud, Derek's knees buckled, and he had to grab the podium to stay upright. Not from disappointment over the game. He'd stopped tracking the score somewhere around round 3. His legs gave out because he had been awake for over 30 hours, driving from a warehouse night shift in Ohio straight to the Atlanta airport, boarding a flight he'd saved for 8 months to afford. Because this was the only chance he'd had in 25 years to be in the same room as his daughter. And he was terrified he'd wasted it on a game show that couldn't give him what he actually needed. Marcus saw him grab the podium and did something the show had never done in 11 seasons. He stopped the taping cold, walked straight past the scoreboard, and said, "Somebody get this man a chair before I finish a single sentence." Derek Owens had not touched his daughter, had not smelled her hair, had not felt the specific weight of a child's hand in his in 25 years. Her name was Renee. She was 26 years old now, a nurse practitioner living 40 minutes from the studio, where her father stood shaking at a podium he barely remembered walking up to. Derek had been 19 when she was born, a father before he'd finished figuring out how to be anything else, and for the first 11 months of her life, he had done what he could. Diapers at 3 a.m., a job at a tire shop, a girlfriend he loved fiercely and fought with just as fiercely. The fighting was the problem, not violence. Derek had never raised a hand to anyone in his life, a fact he would repeat later on that stage with a desperation that made clear how much it mattered to him that people believed it. But noise slammed doors. 2 19-year-olds who did not yet know how to be parents without also being at war with each other. Renee's mother left for her own mother's house in Georgia one night with the baby and never came back. There had been no court order, no formal custody battle, just distance and silence, and a woman who eventually married someone else, and a little girl who grew up calling another man dad because he was the one who showed up. Derek didn't fight it, not because he didn't want to, but because every lawyer he could afford, which was none for the first several years, told him the same thing. Distance plus time plus a new husband in the home usually meant the courts would side with stability, and stability, in the eyes of family court, rarely meant a 19-year-old tire shop mechanic 400 miles away with no legal paperwork establishing anything. But nobody in that studio knew what was about to happen next. For 25 years, Derek worked. He worked construction, then warehouse logistics, then construction again after a knee injury took him off his feet for 6 months, with no income and a landlord who did not care about his knee. He sent money when he could, mailed to an address that changed 3 times over 2 decades. Money he was never certain arrived, never certain was used for Renee at all, and never once asked to be certain, because asking felt like an accusation he had no right to make. He kept a photograph of her at 11 months old in his wallet until the photograph wore through at the folds and had to be laminated at a gas station copy machine, and he carried the laminated version for the next 15 years. He tried to reach out when she turned 18. He wrote a letter, not a card, a full letter, 4 pages. The only time in 25 years he let himself say everything he'd been holding back, and mailed it to the last address he had for her mother. It came back 3 weeks later, stamped return to sender. Not at this address. He tried again at 21. Same result. By 24, he had stopped trying to find her directly and instead applied to be a contestant on 3 different television shows that occasionally reunited families, on the theory that if he couldn't find her, maybe a show with real investigators could. Family Bond was the 3rd show. It was also the one that said yes. The system failure chain that kept them apart for a quarter-century was not one dramatic villain. It was smaller and colder than that. A family court docket that closed his informal visitation inquiry in 1999 as moot. No formal custody order exists to modify. A legal aid office that told him in 2004 his case did not meet priority criteria for limited pro bono resources. A private investigator he saved for 11 months to hire in 2016, who found an address that turned out to be 2 years outdated, and who charged Derek $8,900 for information that led nowhere. Each dead end was a specific letter, a specific denial, a specific stamped rejection that Derek kept in a manila folder in his glove compartment, because somewhere in him he still believed that, someday, someone would need proof of how hard he had tried. He told his coworkers he didn't have kids. It was easier than explaining a daughter he wasn't allowed to know existed to him. "I'm fine," he told his sister every time she brought up Renee's birthday. "Just thinking about her today." That's all it is. It was not all it was. It was a father who marked June 14th on his kitchen calendar every year for 25 years and told no one why. Who bought a birthday gift he never sent 7 separate times before he finally stopped buying them at all. Because the not sending had become its own kind of grief he couldn't keep affording. The daily cost of carrying that showed up in small ways, nobody around him connected to the real cause. The insomnia. The way he sometimes stopped mid-sentence at work and had to shake himself back into the moment. The 30 extra pounds that crept on over a decade of eating dinner, standing at a counter alone. He auditioned for Family Bond with a video application recorded on a borrowed phone in his apartment kitchen, in which he said only one sentence about why he wanted to be on the show. A sentence a producer later said made the entire selection committee go quiet in the review room. "I've had a daughter for 26 years, and I've never once heard her call me Dad. I don't need to win anything. I just need somebody to tell me if she's okay." But the real story hadn't even started yet. What Derek did not know, standing at that podium with 187 points and legs that would not hold him, was that a Family Bond researcher, reviewing his audition tape 11 weeks earlier, had done what production researchers occasionally do when a story moves them personally. She kept digging after her assigned hours ended. She found Renee's nursing license registration, cross-referenced it with a maiden name search, and made a phone call that Renee almost didn't answer, because an unknown Atlanta number calling a working nurse at 7 p.m. rarely means good news. Renee had said yes to a meeting on the condition that no promises be made to her father about how she might respond. Nobody had told Derek that. A young boy in the front row of the audience, seated between his grandparents, apparently unrelated to either family on stage, had been watching Derek shaking hands for the last several minutes of the round. When his grandmother leaned down to ask him what was wrong, he said, loud enough for the boom mic nearby to catch it clean, "Why is that man crying if he didn't lose?" Marcus Steele heard it. He didn't answer the boy directly. He looked at Derek instead, and something in his face changed. The studio fell completely silent. Marcus set his cards down slowly, deliberately, on the podium in front of him, the way a man sets down something he no longer has any use for. He walked to Derek, put a hand on his shoulder, and waited a long moment before speaking, letting Derek catch his breath, letting the room understand that something had shifted. "Stop everything," Marcus said, not loudly, but with a finality the entire crew recognized instantly. Somewhere off camera, a stage manager's voice crackled with confusion into an earpiece, and Marcus held up one hand without turning around. "This has never happened in the 11-year history of this show, and I don't care. Cut the game." He knelt down slightly so he was closer to eye level with Derek, who was still catching his breath in the chair someone had finally brought. "Derek," Marcus said, "tell me her name." "Renee," Derek said. and his voice cracked clean in half on the second syllable. But Steve, Marcus, wasn't done. "Let me tell you something," Marcus said, and the entire studio leaned in, sensing, correctly, that the host was about to say something he had never said on camera before. 30 years ago, I had a little girl of my own I went almost 2 years without seeing regularly, because I was broke and proud and too ashamed to show up without something to offer her besides an apology. I know what it does to a man to carry a photograph of a kid who doesn't know you're carrying it. Because 30 years ago, Derek, I was you." He wasn't finished. Marcus pulled out his phone in full view of the cameras. "This is something I have never done during a taping in 11 years, and if the network doesn't like it, that's a conversation for after the show," he said. He dialed a number, put it on speaker, and the studio heard it ring twice before a woman's voice picked up. His own attorney. A woman named Cassandra, who had handled quiet, off-record legal matters for the foundation before. "Cassandra, I need every resource we have on emergency-mediated family reunification today, and I need to know if there's any way to expedite a paternity acknowledgement filing if it's wanted by both parties. Because I've got a man in front of me who spent 25 years being told no by a system that never once had to look him in the eye." He turned to the wings. "Bring her out." The doors opened. A young woman in nursing scrubs stood in the doorway, having come straight from a shift she'd swapped with a coworker 3 hours earlier without fully explaining why. She stood there for a moment, arms crossed over her chest, not out of hostility, but the particular self-protection of someone who has spent a lifetime being told a story about a man she was never allowed to verify for herself. Derek stood up out of the chair on legs that still weren't steady. He didn't rush toward her. He seemed almost afraid to. "Renee," he said, "I'm not asking you for anything. I just needed you to know I never stopped looking." Renee didn't run either. She walked, slowly, across a stage full of strangers, and stopped 3 feet from a father she had built an entire childhood without. Studying his face the way you study something you're trying to decide is real. Then she said, quietly, "You kept looking?" "Every year," Derek said. "Every single year." She crossed the last 3 feet herself. The audience thought that embrace was the emotional peak. They were wrong, because what came next shocked even the show's own producers, the competing family on stage. The Whitfield family, without being asked, without a word from Marcus, crossed to the other podium and forfeited their round entirely, the mother saying only into the abandoned microphone, "Give them the win. We don't need it today." 3 months after that taping, Derek, Owens, and Renee met for dinner for the first time, without cameras present, something Renee later said in a brief follow-up interview she needed before she could fully believe any of it was real. A year after the taping, Renee invited her father to her hospital's annual gala, introducing him to colleagues for the first time in her adult life as my dad. The episode aired 7 weeks later and crossed 230 million views within its first month, trending under the hashtag #NeverStoppedLooking, a phrase pulled directly from Derek's own words on stage. Today, Derek Owens no longer works warehouse night shifts. He manages logistics for a nonprofit Marcus Steele funded within weeks of the taping called the Never Stopped Looking Foundation, which has since covered emergency legal fees for over 300 parents pursuing reunification with estranged adult children, and paid for 18 private investigators to reopen cold family search cases free of charge. Marcus Steele, asked months later what he remembered most, didn't mention the ratings. "I remember he apologized to her before she'd said a single word," he said. 25 years, and the first thing out of his mouth wasn't, "Where have you been?" It was, "I'm sorry it took this long." That tells you everything about who that man is. Derek still carries the laminated photograph in his wallet. It sits now next to a new one, Renee, 26 years old, arms around her father's neck, both of them laughing at something just off camera. He says he'll probably carry both until the day he dies, one to remember what he almost lost, and one to remember what 25 years of never quitting finally gave back to him. If this incredible story of a father's 25-year search touched your heart, subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. Share this with someone who believes it is never too late to find your family or your way home. Have you ever been reunited with someone you thought was gone for good? Let us know in the comments below, because as Derek Owens proved, a father's love does not need permission to keep showing up.